You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRMArchaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRMArchaeology Podcast, episode 269 for July 26th, 2023. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about filing workers' comp claims and what you and your employer's responsibilities are. So go schedule your annual physical because the CRMArchaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Heather in her sailboat in California.
Hello.
And Bill in his office, also in California.
Yep, I'm back.
So for those listening to the audio podcast, which is probably 99% of you, we started about 30 days ago putting everything on YouTube, even if it was just audio. And this is the first time in I don't even know how long that we've recorded the CRMArch podcast with the video turned on. So if you like to see our crazy faces that, I have a face for podcasting. These guys look great. But if you want to see our YouTube faces, then head over to Archaeology Podcast Network on YouTube and check it out. It's just one more way to consume what we're doing here. It's not really anything special. We're just doing this. Oh, and also it's completely unedited. So any mistakes we make, stay over there because while I'm putting it on YouTube, that's an extra couple hours per show. And I just don't have time to edit it. That's just the processing of everything and getting it up there. So at some point we'll be editing the YouTube video as well. But until, more of you subscribe to the podcast. Yeah, exactly.
It could be completely different podcasts now, Chris.
I know. So, all right. Well, so let's get to the topic at hand. So I've got a friend who's doing some work with a relatively new company to him. And he asked me some questions about workers' comp, just some relatively general questions, but also some questions related to a situation he was dealing with. Now, it's all pretty straightforward. I mean, a lot of us probably have had some kind of even minor injury at work. I slipped on some barbed wire climbing over a fence and sliced open my leg and got puncture wounds on both of my sides of my hands and things like that. And I had to go get a drug test when I was getting fixed up. And because that's part of workers' comp, you have to do it within 24 or 48 hours, at least in Nevada. And you had to fill out special paperwork. And then they also just dealt with the whole medical thing. But what if you have an issue that's you can't necessarily prove 100% that happened at work. And my point is like this friend of mine, he's relatively fit, takes care of himself. He's young and had no problems. And now he's out in the field on a really strenuous project, more strenuous so than he's done recently. He's been doing a lot of monitoring. So he's, now on this really strenuous field project and was starting to get a lot of pain and just feeling this massive pain. And he wanted to go to the doctor and he told his field director about it immediately when he really started to notice it. But it was the kind of thing that kind of came on gradually that, you just kind of ignore it. You think it's going to go away. You're just sore. But, after a weekend, it's still there. You come back and it's just you can't walk. And I just wanted to have a chat because we're not a legal podcast. We're not going to give you any legal advice. Every state is different in how they deal with stuff. But I just want to talk to you guys and see what would you do in that situation? He wanted to know what his chain of responsibility is is telling his field director as soon as he realizes something's going on enough to kind of cover him, or should he get something in writing from HR? Or what if there is no HR? You're a smaller company.
Wow.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, there's a lot with that one.
Yeah, it's tough. The one thing I think that this brings up is the fear that people have for various reasons about contacting HR when it comes to safety, when it comes to injuries. On one side, I remember feeling it, is that that if you start, and this is not, I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying this is a common feeling, is that I'm feeling sore. I'm feeling like I'm injured. I don't want to be that kind of weak link in the crew. And if I get that reputation of always coming down with an injury or always being sick and so a lot of times I think people do not talk about their soreness. They don't talk about, injuries that may be coming. I mean, not all injuries happen, in an acute, right. They don't happen immediately. I mean, It can be chronic. It can be over time. I mean, one issue's back, right? I have two herniated discs. Was that caused by archaeology? Almost. Well, that and my hockey background. One or the other, right?
Yeah.
That's actually also something that people are thinking, okay, well, from the other side, okay, you have a herniated disc. What are all these other things that you're doing, right, that could have caused the herniated disc? Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And from the other side, the one thing that I want to talk about when you brought up this topic, before I was in the position I'm in right now, I was always, I don't know, I kind of bought into this thought that, HR or safety, if you have a large enough company, that when you have an injury and they're a little reticent, they're not quite sure if they want to, if it really is of that level to report or whatever. I thought, to me, that just never sat well with me. And I didn't understand the true meaning behind that. And so, no, if there's an injury, yes, obviously you have to report it. Yeah. I'm talking about like when you have issues that are kind of on the bubble, when you're not quite sure, did it really happen at work, And so these are questions that aren't, number one, may not even be the question of the HR person. It's the insurance, right? There's things that are forcing them to ask questions that have nothing to do with them. This is not how they look at things. They maybe want to take care of you in every way, but these are questions that are required of them to ask. I have a couple other thoughts, but I'll let you guys jump in on your thoughts.
Yeah. One of the things that because I know what you were talking about of being a tough person and just trying to tough it out, right? Like that stuff just builds up. And so early in my career, when I toughed it out, now I'm not as tough anymore because stuff is crooked and broken and, didn't heal properly, right? Because I actually did keep going when there was pain. And so I can recommend from personal experience, don't do that. When it comes to your body, like don't do that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about HR too, that, my wife's been doing HR for a very long time. And one of the things that she always says is there's never any true answers. And the answer is always, it depends. And so this is one of those questions that is, falls in there, right? Because we've got insurance, we've got the liability of the company, we've got your own personal responsibility for taking care of your own body and reporting things, as they're happening, and then your supervisor. So there's a lot of people in there. So it's a really murky situation. So it's difficult to say, like, did this happen while you were, out in the field, or maybe you went to a music festival, right? Or went on a walk with someone after work. And then you just noticed it then, right? So at what point does the pain become, like, where did it originate? And then is that the response? Is that the employer's fault, right? So once again, I'm not a legal scholar or, an HR expert or whatever, but it does sound to me like if this was happening because you're doing a lot more hiking than you were used to, then it's reasonable to assume that injury did start at the workplace. And so that it kind of is the workplace's responsibility to make sure that you, while you're doing your work tasks, don't get further injured, right? Now, the sad reality with a lot of companies is, okay, well, if they're just at home, then they don't get injured anymore. So just go home, and when your hip doesn't hurt anymore, we'll see if there's any work. And that's what every archaeologist is afraid of. And that's the reason why we're running out of archaeologists, because companies do that rather than moving people over or having other tasks that don't involve walking out in the desert all day. The person just has to go and sit at their house, and then basically their position's gone because of that. Yeah.
It's got to be difficult for field technicians that aren't permanent at companies too, because what if you're, you're starting to feel this pain in the last session of a 10-day and you didn't feel it before that project started. But then at the end of the 10-day, you're on to another project and you get to this other project and it just gets worse. And then you report it immediately. It's like, is that company even liable for that? What if it was in a different state and you were in pain in Florida and now you're working in Iowa? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the one thing that people don't talk about, which is a reality that people really should be talking about, and that is when you're managing a project and the conditions on the project, you have to match your crew to your project.
Yeah.
You do. And, it's not... when it comes to, that's not fair, that I can't work on that project, trust me. I mean, if you have somebody who's really, really doing it carefully, trust me, if we hired you anyway, and then we put you and you're like literally climbing up in 100-degree weather, you're going to be cursing our name halfway through that project, right?
Yeah.
So you have to look at people's capabilities and match the project to the capabilities. Now, not everybody wants to go through that work. Sometimes you're desperate. Like, you just need to get people out there.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, put a mirror under the nose, and if it creates condensation, or
Yeah.
put them out there. But
Yeah.
it's a combination of management being a lot more prepared. Sometimes a lot of things happen last minute, but when you have the luxury of preparation, doing that, and then also where you have crews that understand. I mean, you have to understand your own physical limitations. I'm 52 years old, and I'm not in the shape that I was in before. And I know there's some projects, there's no way I should be out there. I can't. So I think people need to be realistic, and I think people need to be understanding of both sides.
Okay. Well, I've got something to kick off the next segment with, and this is going to be a little bit of a shorter show for people because we've all got some extenuating circumstances here today. And it's kind of a makeup show for us anyway, because we missed our normal recording time. So let's take a break, come back on the other side, and I'll kick it off a little bit of a story talking exactly what Heather was talking about. Back in a minute.
College Savings Iowa is now iSave 529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future, because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave 529, for every child, for any adventure.
Save big money on everything for your projects at Menards. Update your outdoor space with our huge in-stock selection of AC2 pressure-treated lumber, decking, and fencing. Load up big savings using our drive-through lumberyard. Plus, get free estimates fast using our deck and fence design programs. Menards, America's #1 home improvement retailer for customer satisfaction, according to J.D. Power. Visit jdpower.com for details and menards.com for deals.
Save big money at Menards.
Welcome back to episode 269 of the CRM Archaeology podcast. And we're talking about workers' comp and reporting, injuries and things like that. And something, Heather, you reminded me when you were talking on the last segment is I was crew chiefing. Really, I was project managering, I guess, technically. I was kind of new at it. It was like I'm a project manager, but there's really somebody who's watching me because I was new at it. And it was for this other company I was working for. But here's the thing. You mentioned assessing people's abilities. And I definitely do that from a intellectual standpoint, right? Like if somebody's really good at this, or even if they want to learn something that they're not good at, I'm conscious of that as well. Right. And, but when it comes down to, let's say, physical abilities, that is such a sticky gray area because
and you can't discriminate.
No, because check this out. I had a crew. This was like 12 years ago. I had a crew of 2 other people. One was somebody who'd never worked in the field before. This was literally her first field project. She didn't look like she had any muscle on her body whatsoever. And I don't want to say anything. You're coming out with us. We're doing 10 on 4 off. It's about 5,000 foot altitude and rugged terrain, and it's going to suck. It's also like 100 degrees, and this is going to be terrible for everyone, even if you're in good shape. And the other guy was, I'm not a small guy. The other guy was a big guy, and he was older. He had, I don't really know what his experience was, to be honest with you. He was just given to me as a crew person. Well, both of them, for very different reasons, had a really hard time with that project. I felt like the one in shape on that project, which is not a position I'm always in. But she was struggling because she'd never done that kind of physical labor before. Turns out he was struggling because he'd had triple bypass surgery the year before, and he was having trouble breathing. And I'm like, okay, so first off, I had the crew changed out. I was like, these guys need to do something else. I'm not going to be responsible for a heart attack in the field, right? But then here's the other thing. Let's say he did have a heart attack in the field. Is that a workers' comp issue, or is that a pre-existing condition that they could argue?
Well, it's both, but then it happened at work, right?
Yes.
Right.
And so that is one thing that I was going to bring up.
I want to add to this too.
Yeah. HR safety, they're always trying to look at mitigating issues like this, right? So this isn't discrimination. I'm not going to go and look at somebody and say, I think they're overweight or they don't have a muscle on their body, because honestly, I think sometimes you're going to be surprised because sometimes people's mental toughness can push them through. And then you have a guy who's all muscle bound and it's all show muscle and can't do anything, you know? So you can't do that. So I'm not saying discriminating by looking at them and stereotyping, you know, what I think they can do. It's giving people a chance, but then after time realizing that maybe, okay, this area of, you know, this type of staff task I need, they don't fit into that. So this is just through experience. And then also this is, you know, people need to be realistic. You're not working for a company and the company doesn't owe you to pay you an hourly wage because they hired you to do nothing. Yeah. They hired you to work in the field. They hired you for all these tasks. And that's why you see these job descriptions say you're able to hike so many miles a day. You're able to withstand certain kind of, you know, climatic situations. You're able to lift 50 pounds, you know, for extended periods of time. These things, like, they're real. And they put these on job descriptions for a reason, to cover themselves, because you do get people that go out there and think, oh, well, you know, you hired me, you just owe me. No, and honestly, people also need to look at it. You're not being a good team player here either, because when you have somebody who has issues health-wise or whatever that keeps them from being able to be productive in the field, you're hurting the others. The others have to pick up your slack now, right? Yeah. And so, I think people need to be honest, and I think a lot of people honest with themselves and what their abilities are.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that thing about show muscle. I'm sick of you guys always being like, this guy's got all this muscle. How come he can't lift more?
Yeah.
I never had show muscle. I never had no muscle. But I do know what it's like to just get given the people that you've got, right? And so also in Arizona, that's a holy cow. There's a lot of people who have these grandiose dreams about doing Southwestern archaeology, and then they get to the Southwest and they, you know, it's not easy. And so I could never, you're given people for your projects. You don't get to choose. It's whoever they've hired, right? And I can have a say on who I want if it's someone I already know. But at the end of the day, if we just need 11 people, then we just need 11 people. So we can't really be sifting through and trying to do those kind of, you know, can you please pick this bucket of groundstone up over your head? Can you please walk across this parking lot in Arizona sun? Like, we don't really get to give them physical tests to see if they can do it.
No training.
No, it's not the American Gladiators. So you just have to do what you do. So the huge task for anyone who's running crews out there is to find a way to modify the workflow, or find a way for everyone to get across the finish line, because you can't have, like Chris was saying, he's got one person who had, heart surgery earlier, one person who it's their very first job. So the person who's very first job, they need to get acclimated. You have to find some kind of a way to get that person through the project. The person who had heart surgery, you need to make sure that person doesn't, collapse and hurt themselves out there even more. So here you are as this human that's like, okay, we've got 5 people, 2 of them need some kind of modification, or something's got to happen. And just like you were saying, Heather, in some situations, that's just not possible. If we're way back there and you are from, I don't know, Connecticut or Alaska, and it's 106 out there every single day, and we're doing 10 hours, and it takes us 2 hours just to hike to the site. I mean, you're going to be weakened fast. And the sun, it not only takes it out of you immediately, but it also builds up. So heat and sun are something that can build up. And if people don't get proper lodging at night, or they don't sleep, or they don't drink water when they get back to the hotel, they'll be diminished. And day after day, 10 days in a row, that person is in a lot of trouble by the time you get to like the 4th or 5th day. And so, what do you do with that, right? What do you do if everybody goes out drinking and doesn't hydrate, and now you're stuck with 8 people that are all hungover, but we've got to work and it's 100 and some degrees. That's a health risk. That's the potential for people to get injured out in the field. And the other thing too, my last comment is, you can never tell when it's going to happen to you or anyone else. Someone can be fully fit. They've been doing this for 7 years, and all of a sudden, just one day, they feel lightheaded and they just don't feel so good. So paying attention to your crew and looking for the signs, making sure that there's like certain levels of, okay, they're going to go to the shade, or they're going to go to the truck, or we're just going to the hotel, or we're going to the hospital, like that we have all those kind of things in place to get people to safety. Like, those are really important things for folks to work out. And guess what? A lot of times your principal investigator, the person who gave you it, didn't They didn't look for any of the hospitals. They didn't plan ahead. If, one Jeep has to go out, do we have 2 vehicles, to back up the other one? What are we going to do if someone gets sick? That's on you.
2 things on that real quick. The thing you were saying, Bill, about feeling lightheaded, you never know what those reasons are too, right? Like I actually felt that when I was working on that big China Lake projects I've talked about a lot on different shows. I mean, my tiny little company of one person was running a $500,000 project with $30,000 in payroll and per diem every 2 weeks. And I was probably a little stressed out. And not only that, but we're dealing with unexploded ordnance, Mojave green rattlesnakes that will just chase you because they don't care. And, all this other stuff. And there was and also it was hot. It was Ridgecrest, California. And there was like a couple times on one session, I remember I just kind of had to sit down. I felt a tightness and I felt a shortness of breath. And as a veteran, I went to the VA and they actually, I mentioned that to my doctor. I didn't get checked out right away. Mind you, I'm running this project. There's no one to replace me. But when it was over, I did my annual checkup. It was a few months later. And I just happened to mention that to my doctor and they were overcautious. They did an angiogram where they went in through my wrist and through my leg just to make sure they could get, both sides of my heart. Everything looked fine. So I don't know why that happened. I think it was just stress, but you really just never know. And through an abundance of caution, you really should just, get checked out. But then again, like you said, Heather, another thing I want to comment on, you said the mental toughness. Sometimes people will push through. Well, the girl, what was it just last year that died in Louisiana? She's new. She's like, I mean, people are saying she may have had an underlying heart condition and not even known about it or something like that. Right. But even so, if she had been feeling something, would she have said anything because she just wanted to prove herself? You know what I mean? And Bill, I mean, I saw yesterday on the Weather Channel, Phoenix had its 23rd consecutive day of highs at 110 degrees or more. How do you even work in that? How is anybody doing work down there right now?
No, and you're right. There's tons of companies right now. There's people in Maricopa County and the, Valley of the Sun. They're burning it out. They're out there right now. Yeah. They're doing archaeology right now when it's 113, 116. I mean, that's just the reality of working in Arizona. And that's what's up. If you think that you're going to come from Seattle and go to Phoenix, you are risking yourself. And also we were just working in the Virgin Islands for 40 days. And every single day had a heat index of at least 99. It was like 70% humidity every single day. And sometimes it even rained. And it was, probably 88, 90 degrees every single day, every day.
But you're in the Virgin Islands. You were on vacation, Bill. You're getting that Berkeley.
I'll show you the photos of my vacation, digging through an entire layer, screening through layers of a burned house, just black. I mean, I sweat so much that I could literally wring my shirt out. That's how disgusting it was down there. Yeah. Sweating through your pants, sweating through everything, sweating into your backpack, right? Because there's no relief from the humidity, right? Like your clothes are totally soaked all day long. And, we have to take a lot of caution in the beginning because, everybody's coming from everywhere else. And I guarantee you they weren't outside in the Virgin Islands, for 6-8 hours a day in the sun, direct sun, digging. And so, you have to watch your people. And we went at a pace that would have been like laughable for cultural resources in the beginning. Then by the end, folks are moving like foundation blocks and digging shovel probes in 40 minutes. Well, they didn't start that way. They started off us having to be flexible and let people take plenty of breaks and have shade and everything. And then by the end, they can just go and take a screen and excavate a shovel probe like 70, 80 centimeters through clay like it was, a normal probe. So that's what I mean by making sure that you're flexible and watching your crew. That doesn't mean that immediately this person will never get to do archaeology, but if you give them that space so they don't hurt themselves, not only are you mitigating the risk, because when it comes to occupational health and safety, if you notice a risk, you're supposed to design a workflow that will mitigate or eliminate the risk, right? And in archaeology, we know we can't eliminate risk. So one of the ways is to make sure that a person is easing into a situation like Phoenix. Those people who are out there digging in Phoenix, if they got dropped in there right away from, Alaska or Seattle, they're toast. There's, hardcore people who have been working in Arizona for years. And so they're less likely to die, but they still need to pay attention to their bodies. And you still need to pay attention to your crew because once again, it can happen to anyone. Like Chris was saying, it can happen at any time to anyone.
All right. Well, on that note, let's take a break and we'll talk about, maybe what companies could or possibly are doing on the other side. Back in a minute.
College Savings Iowa is now iSave529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave529 for every child, for any adventure.
Welcome back to episode 269 of the CRM Archaeology podcast. So one thing I've been thinking about through this, and I was really thinking about this in segment 1, but it's good for segment 3 to wrap this up. Have either of you guys worked for or heard of, or, Heather, you work for a slightly bigger company that might be able to do this. Mm-hmm. Has anybody ever had like a medical checkup pre-employment or even annually, just to get like a baseline so the company can help out with their liability and say, oh, you hurt yourself in the last job and you come here and claim workers' comp because you're a field tech, and that's how it works. You're working all the time anyway. It doesn't matter what company you're working for mentally. Even if you hurt yourself on the last job, this is the one where you're in pain. Yeah. So what do you guys think?
Well, I don't want to step in front of Heather too quick. No, I never worked for a company that did the screening. I did it myself. So I had to get my own physicals because I get one a year through my insurance. So that would be the time when I would talk about all the times my back hurt and everything. But then I would even add, so for a while in Seattle, they didn't charge me, but in Arizona, they did charge me to get all my blood work done to see if my arsenic, mercury, and all those other things, because doing historical archaeology, I dig through petroleum pits and, factories where they had all kinds of battery acid, right? So those are the kind of soils that I was constantly digging in. And we didn't always test those soils to make sure they were full of contaminants, right? So if you're digging at a mining site and they're processing ore and stuff, nobody's really necessarily testing that thing to see if you're sick. So I would always get my blood work done at my physical too. So it wasn't just about like my body and it breaking, but am I absorbing chemicals from the environment at a very high level? And at what point did that start, right? So I'm not doing it after every single field project, but once a year with my physicals. When I was doing field archaeology, I would still get my blood work done. And in Arizona, I had to pay for it. Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah. Wow. I've never, you talk to my team, they'll tell you they're always on me to go to the doctor. I hate going to the doctor.
Oh, man.
I'm really bad about it. I'm so bad. Anyway, but I think that's a great idea. Having companies do that, I think Bill's idea is good. I mean, that's, self-care, that's being responsible. I think that's really smart. Now, with companies, actually, that's a really good question. I've never heard of it. I actually think that would be a very fair thing to do. I mean, we do drug tests ahead of time, right? And that's mainly required, usually because companies require, not your company. It's usually because a client company requires it. So, wow, I actually think it might be a good idea. I actually, I come from my sports background. We had training camps at the beginning of every year. And that's because, during the summer, people are getting soft. Well, that's because my sport was hockey, and
no ice.
Right. Well, there's always ice. But we would have, it was like, it was a reality check, right? The beginning of every year is who stayed in shape and who was throwing up over the side of there's things I think about that were happening in training camps that, oh my God, I would never fly with HR. Like, but, like people just skating people just to see who's going to throw up first kind of thing. It's like, we don't do this. Can you imagine us doing that in the field? Running transects to see who's going to throw up first. Anyway,
I think Arizona just takes care of that for you. All you got to do is go outside and walk to the edge of the Best Buy parking lot, and you'll be puking.
Right. So I actually think that this is just kind of a pie in the sky thing, but I actually think it's a good idea. I think before the field season, having a training camp, not to test people, but to give people a reality check, and also. Yeah, it's a reality check, basically. Now, when it comes to the one thing that I did want to talk a little bit about is when it comes to HR, the one thing that employees need to understand is that companies have a certain kind of rating when it, as far as accident rating and you could end up not getting a job because of your rating. And that's a lot of it is based on the type of report and the amount of the report. And so your rating can jump and only, one report can knock your rating to a deficit, right? Yeah. And so that's something that they're always thinking about. I mean, like, I guarantee you, your HR department would want to help you in every single incident. They have to think about, okay, first of all, how are we going to report this honestly? And how is this report going to impact our ability to get work? Because you can knock yourself out for an entire year on a rating because it had nothing to do, wasn't the fault of the company or anything. Maybe it wasn't even the fault of the employee. Just one of those things happened. So I think that people need to understand that, I think the responsibility is on both sides. People cannot just show up to work and not prepare their body for it. You see it. I see it all.
Yeah.
Well, and along those lines, and Bill, I was going to mention this, and you put it in our comments here, about field techs taking care of themselves. It's going to have to be the kind of things that you budget for, because if you don't have insurance, which a lot of field techs probably don't, I mean, with like Obamacare and stuff, you're required to carry something or do something, or you get penalized for it. But either way, people get around that, and they either just, or they just don't go to the doctor because they don't have like a regular doctor to go to. But you can go to places and get a checkup and get a physical and get blood work done. And it might cost you a few $100s, right? But it's the kind of thing like taking care of your car. You get your oil changed, get your own oil changed. You know what I mean? And get that checked out. And it might suck to say that, but like you guys are both saying, it's the thing to do, and you really should do that.
No, that was I was going to mention about that they don't. Most field techs don't have health insurance, and so folks are caught in this like kind of middle zone where I think a lot of us for the longest time was like, well, the company needs to be taking care of this, and the company needs to do that, and the company needs to take care of, but the amount of delay that I experienced in my career between the company doing anything and like me getting hurt or getting the help I need was always so far that, it's not like I went to HR and said my wrist hurts and they were like, okay, go to quick care right now. That was, fill out this form and I've got to pass it through here and there, and your wrist hurts. You got to get to work tomorrow. So you got to see, do you have a broken bone or can you go to work? Right. So those are the kind of things that sometimes for your own health, you just have to bite the bullet. And I hope that we can get universal single payer healthcare. Like that just to me solves many things for companies, many things for individuals. People don't get hurt as much because they can go to the doctor. They're not afraid of going into, extreme debt because they hurt their wrist. Yeah. So, these are the kind of things I can see where, I mean, that's how these other countries folks live longer than us, because they don't have to worry. If they get a cough, they just go to the doctor. Right. So, it's tragic, but at a certain point, how long would you wait after getting an injury for you to actually go to the doctor on your own, even if you didn't have insurance, right? Because a small minor thing that kind of hurts today, if you take care of it real quick and give it the rest, then you don't have, $50,000, $60,000 bills. But if you let it go longer and tough it out and just keep grinding, then you're going to get a bad injury. And like I said, by the time the company has filled the workman's comp claim out, you've gotten the money, this and that, like now your illness is way worse, right? Because you didn't go and take care of it, right? So I mean, it's a horrible situation to be in, and I have been in it personally. But like you're saying, sometimes a couple $100 well placed will save your career and save you thousands down the road.
Yeah. And not only, like you said, save your career, because so many people, especially new people in this field, are just running the edge of payroll, working paycheck to paycheck. And that's just the way it is in this field. And, you're afraid that, hey, if I report something or if I go get checked out and I find out I can't work for 2 weeks or a month, that could be enough to make it so you never work in archaeology again, right? You don't ever get another job. If that was at the end of the field season, I mean, it could just be, I don't know, could be devastating for people. So if we had that sort of assurance that, hey, I can't take this time off, I will get paid, or I can maybe do something in the office, or I can do something else, and still, not have that physical limitation. But, it made me think, Heather, too. Yeah. I
was going to say, or like FMLA, where it's like, you know what, my wrist hurts now. It's going to probably hurt for 6 weeks, but I'm going to take this job driving, Lyft or doing something else, or I'm going to work at, some other place But
Yeah.
in 6 weeks, when my wrist is back, can I come back and do archaeology? I mean, that would be amazing if somehow there was that kind of situation where they'd know that, okay, Bill's out for 6 weeks, but on, October, whatever, we could call him and have him go back out on projects, like just kind of a delay.
Sure.
And it's sad that you have to find another job because this is the United States, but seriously, it's better to take those 6 weeks off and let your arm and whatever else rehabilitate so that you can do archaeology for the next 6 years.
Yeah. And Heather, you were saying how it sounded like a good idea with companies maybe doing a pre-physical like liability check. But I was thinking that was a good idea too. It's why I mentioned it. But then while you were talking, I was like, man, I mean, these companies, especially bigger ones, all work on statistics and money. And if workers' comp fraud, which is what they would call it, was really a thing, then they'd already be doing that. So it must not be that big of a financial hit for companies. Otherwise, they would be proactively doing something, I would imagine, if people were just showing up and making a workers' comp claim in the first segment,
I don't think people actually think that much into it.
No,
I think you're giving them way credit. They probably should, but I think they're giving, I don't know, from my perspective, I think that's giving them a lot of credit.
Yeah, it might be.
I will say when I was in, school for archaeology, I don't remember once hearing, you better be in good shape. These are the realities of your physical, what's going to be asked of you physically. I don't remember that. That's another, and I know we say this a lot, broken record, it needs to start at the university because you have a lot of people that get into archaeology that are more kind of bookworm people. And nowadays with young people, they're not as active as they used to be. They're just not. They're more in front of their screens. And so people are going to be going into this field blinded, like blindsided. Yeah. They're not going to realize what's going to be required of them. And I think that's really important, is that people are going into it with full knowledge.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The one thing I was going to say, I just realized it this last summer working with students. As I talk to folks, people who did stuff like dance team, basketball, Boy Scouts, cheerleading, gymnastics, football, like those people, a lot of times you'll find that, oh yeah, when I was in middle school, I played basketball, or, I was a cheerleader all the way through high school, or, all different kinds of like team and like physical active folks. They do really good in archaeology fieldwork. It's kind of crazy. And then I watch it, and it's not just archaeology fieldwork. I know a lot of people who also did team sports who are great in the lab and also great at a lot of different levels. And so it's kind of, I'm just now putting that together this last year, that a lot of the people that I worked with, they played soccer or they, for a couple of years, and it didn't even have to be in high school. It could be like way back when they were in elementary school or, middle school. It just seems to me like that kind of physical activity. I just now put it together that is a strong predictor of someone being able to do field work.
Yeah.
I think there's a few reasons that carry over to lab as well. First of all, it's teamwork. It's also knowing that you can work. I'm sorry, I'm hearing something on my phone is clanging. Sorry. It's distracting. You know what it's like to fail, and that failure's not bad, right?
Yeah.
So you're not walking it like, and if you're on a team and you're acting like Mr. Know-It-All, right? Like either you can do something or you can't, and that doesn't work. So the failure, being able to go out and try something without this fear of failing all the time, that's what pulls people back and prevents them from being able to learn and do better. And then from a physical point of view, unless you have pushed your body, you will never know what it can do. Yeah. So unless you've pushed your body, and the only way to do that is, the only way to know where your body, how far you can go is to, through sports or some kind of physical activity. And so even though somebody may have done it, like you said, Bill, back in elementary school, they still have that experience. And they know also that you can't just go in cold. Like you got to prepare yourself. And it's funny. I was on a project and we were doing kind of like, pre-con meeting and everything. And this one company, they all laugh at them, but they make everybody stretch. Everybody. Like whether they're sitting at a desk or whatever, in the beginning of the day, everybody stretches. And I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started doing yoga before I even started doing archaeology because I used to work at Costco, and that place just breaks your body down standing on concrete like that and lifting. And so my body was in a lot of pain. So I already had that habit of stretching before work.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that's about all the time we have today. Hopefully, we gave some people some words of encouragement, especially as we're in, one of the hottest heat waves the world has ever had, really. I mean, people are hot all over the place.
Yeah, one thing to think about, this is the coolest the earth will ever be.
Yes.
So if you were looking for it to somehow, in our lifetime, right? So if you were thinking that somehow these, unprecedented levels in Arizona, by the time you're 40 or 50, if you're listening to this, 120 will be a normal thing for Phoenix, and 130 by the time you're an elder is going to be what's up. So if you can't make it now when it's 103, then what are we going to do when it's 130 and we still have to do archaeology outside?
Indeed. Well, on that horrible note, let's
I mean, it's Phoenix, so what? I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Folks know I lived in Tucson, right? I went to the real University of Arizona. Phoenix to me is like, you don't even fly into that thing if you don't have to. Your plane might crash in the summer. It's too hot. So I got no love for Phoenix. I like people from Phoenix. I like individuals. The place itself, I don't have anything really good to say about Phoenix.
It's literally hell right now. Yeah. All right, guys.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for this. And everybody, again, remember, first off, we have affiliate links that really help us out. We have membership, archpodnet.com/members. And now everything is going on to YouTube if you'd rather consume your podcast that way, or, see what we look like so you can throw stuff at us when you see us at conferences. All right. Thanks, guys. And we'll see you next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.